Hey folks, welcome back to the Rebel's Edge. You're about to see a stock that posted its first ever operating profit. And Pete and I have it for you on the Rebel's Edge right now. Bang.
Nothing like starting it off with a bang.
Well, it's always good to kick things off with a bang.
Yeah.
And we appreciate all of you tuning in. Hopefully you'll tell a friend about the show as well. This is the Rebel's Edge. He's Pete Najarian. I am Jon Najarian. Jared is handling all of the duties of the timers that you'll see, the date on the bottom of the screen, the ticker, all of that stuff is part of what Jared is doing here as well.
Giddy up.
Giddy up. And we always kick it off with the macro minute because some firms, some TV shows who I will not name, spend the first 30 minutes of their show talking macro, and you can't really eat macro, can you, Pete?
Macro is macro, man. It's what happens after you interpret the macro. That's what matters.
Yeah, well, so we're going to spend a grand total of 1 minute on the macro because that's what we call it, the macro minute. And I'm going to say coming up, Pete, we've got the jobs report. That'll be the end of this week, of course. And that will be a lead into next week with the Fed on the 13th when they will tell us, which we already know, unless something really weird happens, 99% chance they're going to stay with the pause.
Yeah, that pause is, I'm just going to go right to that, John. That pause is an absolute at this point in time. I think that it's the highest number that I recall ever seeing in terms of where they are right now and what the odds are going to be. And we're going to see that pause. People are trying to interpret it, though, John, and that's really the storyline. The interpretation is this the final pause and then we start cutting? There's some people out there saying that. Or are they going to ever raise again? Because that's not off the table either. I think Powell's been clear. He'll continue to be clear. And when we get that pause, then we'll actually hear what they're really talking about going into the future and obviously how the data is going to look, if it's going to change anything about how the Fed's viewing the markets.
Yeah, I'm right there. I think they are likely to stick with the pause for several of these Fed meetings, Pete. All right, so as far as fantastic futures.
Fantastic futures.
Well, don't you wish you paid attention to fantastic futures, folks? Because since it broke back to 30,000 plus to the USD just a little bit ago, the Bitcoin futures have been on a rally. And today they're 42,800. That's 42.8. That's a big move, folks. So that's my fantastic future for today.
And there's so many different ways to play it, John. It's a lot of fun. You and I have had unusual option activity in the derivatives markets that have been absolutely incredible. I'm going to go to the 10-year, and here's why. We've talked about that a lot. Haven't done as much lately, but down 2%, underneath 4.2, John. This has been a pretty dramatic drop. And look at the reaction that we have seen like a day like today with the NASDAQ. The NASDAQ was in negative territory. It was red. All of a sudden you start to see that 10-year start to ease back again, and it goes from 14,121 to 14,285. That's a pretty nice move to the upside, putting it back into the green from being in the deep red. I think that 10-year, always keep your eye on that and see what's going on, because that is going to tell you a lot about the NASDAQ and the markets themselves.
Yeah. You guys remember, of course, all of the money that was being borrowed by, in particular, NASDAQ stocks like Apple. They have billions of dollars in the bank, but they could invest it in things and make more money from it. So why not borrow it 1 or 2 or 3 or 4%? Well, especially now when it's 8, you know that if it starts coming back down, many people will jump right back in and start borrowing again and so forth. But I agree, Pete. I think that this is the barometer that people should be paying attention to, is the 10-year. All right, let's talk about Gyre Therapeutics, Gyre Therapeutics, clinical stage biopharma company. Well, when you're doing anti-fibrotic therapeutics and you're going through phase trials and so forth, things can be really great or really bad. Well, today they're really great. It's up double digits. And they're going after various liver diseases, Pete, with their treatments. And apparently people are pretty optimistic about it. They have a meeting, of course, they had a meeting in Boston just a month ago. And apparently things that were said there, people continue to believe that these guys are going to have some great news soon about liver diseases and their ability to treat them.
And that's exactly right, John. I mean, we're talking about a fairly small company in the big scheme of things. It's an interesting company out of San Diego, but they also have ties to China as well in terms of some of the background for them. So interesting for sure. A lot of preclinical type levels of where they are right now, which means there are a lot of different drugs, but they're out into the future. And that's something I think you always want to know about. We talk about it here all the time when we talk about biotech. It's a matter of, and quite honestly, the pharmaceutical names, but that's what really matters. Are they in, what part of the clinical testing are they in? Now, this is going to be interesting, and they are very positive about what they're doing right now with some of the ways they're trying to treat liver disease and so forth. That's going to be big. And if it is big, that's something that I think that the big, huge pharmaceutical names, they're going to start knocking on that door and saying, hey, man, can we look at your books? Because this might be somebody that we're going to try to buy. But that's only if they can get far enough along and show that they really do have something that the world is going to need.
Yeah, it's a question of burn rate. Whenever you hear bio anything, folks, it's going to be burn rate. That goes with bio. Yep. That's the B. And then it's, okay, is it a known way of going after this disease? Is it a unique way of going after one of these diseases? A unique way might sound like just fabulous, but if nobody else has done it, then they're going to scrutinize it even more. So anyway, be aware of that. Now let's talk about GitLab, Pete, because GitLab, GTLB, it's up double digits, posted their first ever operating profit. Now that's a big deal. So they finally crossed over into operating profit. However, some rival software development companies could offer a better way to play the growing demand for this sector. And that's what analysts over at D.A. Davidson said. But despite that, stock was moving pretty strong, Pete.
Well, they beat and then they raised for the quarter. So there's a lot of things underneath that look really, really positive right now. This is a company that John, the stock's up 36% year to date already. It's having a really big day today. So it's really moving in the right direction. Their retention is strong. Seems like things are really moving for this company right now. Now, can that continue? Right now, we're looking at about 6 times normal volume. And when I looked at that, that was in 2 hours into the day. We're deeper than that. So there's a lot of volume, a lot of turnover right now, a lot of excitement about what this company's doing into the future because of the fact that outlook was strong. That's what you and I talk about all the time. When you deliver for the last quarter, but people always want to know what's next. And right now, the what next is a good thing, and they're actually reacting very nicely with that.
Well, I think this is one that people should be aware of, Pete, because Microsoft and a bunch of companies were making runs at this company. Yeah. And, whenever you've got something that is developing things, like I said, in the prior stock, therapeutics, and in this stock, software, and getting people together for that, pretty interesting stock to pay attention to. All right, what about Land's End, Pete? LE. This one also up pretty strong today. What did they have? They increased profit, which is good, of course. Net revenue declined, however, which you might not think would be so great, but they were able to squeeze more money out of less sales, Pete. So that's a sign that, this online retail that they're in the space of is doing pretty well.
Yeah, and again, it comes down to that outlook, right? They came back and they said, you know what, our outlook looks very strong, even though, like you just said, their revenue was down. They actually had some really nice numbers. Their margins increased. A year ago, they were at about 40%. Now they're at 47%. There's a lot of things really going right. Now they've just got to get this figured out from the revenue standpoint. If they can get that, John, this is a company that maybe can actually get up and run. It is getting up and running today pretty nicely, up about 10%, but Land's End has seen some higher levels. This is a stock that, in the last year, John, it's been between 6 and 11. Here we are in the $7 range, $7.40, somewhere right close to that number. So it's on the lower end, but can it get back up towards that double digits, 10, 11, 12? Maybe. They like that outlook, and I think people are very excited about what they're doing and how they're accomplishing this with the gross margins.
Yep, and what happened also, Pete, was they had a big reduction in inventory. Yeah. People love talking about Boeing having a $12 billion backlog or whatever it happens to be at that time. And some people hang their hat on that. I don't. But working through an inventory, especially when you're a retailer, is a good thing because it probably means you're not going to have to do as much cost cutting after Christmas sales and things like that. Keep an eye on Land's End, Ellie, like Pete says, especially on the low end. Not at the bottom, but at the low end of its 52-week. All right, another double-digit one, Pete, but this one to the downside. And I think we can both figure out why. Sphere. Now, it's gorgeous. Pete and I were out in Vegas for a big charity event back in September, I think, Pete. And you saw that thing with the giant eyeball on it, and then U2 came in, and they were in residence. And it's you go into that Sphere, and not surprisingly, Pete, it used to be called Madison Square Garden Entertainment. Well, they spent a couple $2 billion building this thing. And it might be a while before they ever make money with this, Pete. It's spectacular, and it's great for Vegas, but I don't know if it's so great for shareholders because they lose a lot of money on this every single month, even with U2 in there. And now the new one that's going in, I think, Pete, is the Fish, which is more or less I think a Grateful Dead band or something like that, like a cover band for Grateful Dead. Anyway, they're raising a lot of money to help pay for, what they've done and what they want to do. But those convertible notes, they come at a cost.
Well, this is one of those great examples, John, where you've got a high level of shorts in the stock. And in this case, the shorts are right. They're right, and they're right. And why do I say that multiple times? Well, the cash flow, I should say cash burn, is $1 billion for this. That's not such a great number. That's a little bit worrisome, I'd say. Their debt level right now is about $1 billion. There's a lot of things that are kind of, it's beautiful. People are talking about it. They do talk about it. It's great. But to your point, John, when do they make money? When do they got to stop raising money and start making money? And that's a question we don't have an answer for. And I don't know that they could give you that answer on the time frame of when that's going to occur because it just hasn't happened. And this is a stock that's getting beat pretty good today, down about 13%. Stock's been anywhere between 18 and 44. It's right around 29 now. I think it's still too high. I think it's going to continue to burn. And I think the only thing that actually turns this is if it gets into that meme stock category where, all right, time for a short squeeze. Let's go after them. Is this Peloton? Kind of. Is this, Carvana? Kind of. But, you look for that. And when is that moment going to happen for these guys where they get the short side of this and maybe do get a squeeze? It hasn't happened yet, and I'm not looking for that. So for right now, I think these shorts are smiling. They're smiling big, and they're going to continue to smile.
Well, Pete, and like you say, $1 billion debt already. It's only $1 billion company. So pretty soon people are looking at that going, wow, $1 billion debt. Their cash burn is extraordinary. To your point, that $1 billion. This is something they've got to find a way. And they own Radio City Music Hall. They own the Beacon Theater. They own the Goodman Theater in Chicago. These aren't like big revenue producers. I mean, you're not talking about hundreds of millions of dollars there, Pete. You're talking about hundreds of thousands of dollars. Granted, when U2's playing at the Sphere, probably millions of dollars per concert, but U2's walking out with most of that. So, the venue itself is gorgeous, but again, great for Vegas, maybe not so great for Sphere shareholders. All right, we know you guys love this. This is a segment where Pete and I take a look at something feeding into sports, and this is one of his favorite guys, of course, Jim Harbaugh. So let's hear what some folks are saying about Jim Harbaugh when he was a football player before he was a football coach.
Jim Harbaugh, in his playing career, this is stunning, had more rushing yards.
Now look at that, Pete.
Than Bo Jackson.
More rushing yards. These are two, podcasters, of course, talking about it, but more rushing yards than Bo Jackson. You believe that?
It is true. I couldn't believe it either.
And it might say something about Michigan football too, Pete, because even though he could throw the rock,
blow your mind, Jeremy.
at Michigan they don't throw it much.
Was the swaggiest quarterback.
Had to run for the first team.
Yep, and I remember when he came in there, Pete, to the league. And they had said, look, no Michigan quarterback has ever, when Jim Harbaugh came in, ever led a team to, the promised land or anything else. And he came that close, Pete. I remember when Harbaugh was, the player that he was. And, he'd scramble. And there are quarterbacks that do. Michael Vick, obviously Mahomes, obviously Josh Allen. There are a lot of quarterbacks that run. But this guy led one of the, best running backs in NFL history, Bo Jackson, in rushing. So that's pretty extraordinary.
Jim Harbaugh, John, when you look at his resume, it's pretty remarkable, right? I mean, you look at his football resume as a player, great. I have to admit it, as much as I hate doing it because I don't like Michigan, but I have to admit it. I played against Jim in college. The guy was unbelievable. The team was unbelievable. And then he gets in the NFL, has some success. Then he goes into coaching. He kills it down at San Diego, kills it with Stanford, kills it with the 49ers, comes back to Michigan. He's killed it there. They actually beat Ohio State once in a while, which some of the previous coaches couldn't do. So anyway, when you really look at everything he's done, John, here's the big question for you on Jim Harbaugh. Does he just finally say, I'm done with you guys, man? The NCAA, you guys are a pain in the butt. This NIL thing is a complete, cluster. And I'm out. I'm going to the NFL where we call it free agency, which is what it is, not a portal. And we pay players, what they probably should be getting as opposed to what you might think they should. I still am absolutely floored by the fact that Brock Purdy's making $850,000. And meanwhile, that clown at USC is making $3 million, and then Shedeur Sanders is making $4 million. That's not okay. There's something wrong with college football, and that's one of them right there, John.
Yeah, well, that clown that Pete says at USC or at UCLA. At USC, that clown was last year's Heisman Award winner, Caleb Williams.
But all of a sudden, the wheels didn't come off. He still had a great year. And John, the guy's a great quarterback. I say clown because any guy who goes into this whole thing and then makes that idiotic statement that he wants to be paid part of the team, that's why he's a clown. I mean, talk about a guy who's worried about next year when he should be worrying about this year. And by the way, anybody who didn't follow it, do you remember seeing USC after about week 5, even anywhere in the ranking? I mean, they just bang, 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 bang. So, it's just one of those things, John, where sometimes you got to be where you are. You got to be in the present. You can't always be looking in the future. And when he came off at that line, I lost it for that. That's it's just not.
Well, and Bo Nix and Penix both put up better numbers.
Yep.
Penix from Washington, Bo Nix at Oregon, and he gets rid of the ball fast too, Pete.
Yep.
Bo Nix, by the way. And I think he led the team in rushing as well that game, Pete. So Bo Nix, pretty damn good quarterback all the way around. If I were the Bears, if they get to, be in position to get somebody like that, that's the guy I want, Bo Nix.
Yep.
Penix is a great player, but he's had a checkered past of injuries, not of his personal life, but of his injuries. And that scares me off, Pete, from taking what otherwise might be one of the greatest stories in college football right now is Penix. But anyway, all right, Pete, how about the portal? Tell us about what you're seeing right now.
All right. Well, so this is a perfect segue, what we came from to where we're going, because Jon, how about this? When you look at the portal, first of all, it is packed. I mean, packed. You and I talked about it about a week or so ago when everybody finished their seasons, and all of a sudden a day later, 2 days later, they go into the portal. There were 90 guys who went into the portal. Well, now pretty much take your pick at a quarterback who's not in there's less that are not in the portal than those that are in the portal. Even the University of Minnesota, where I played not too many miles that way, our quarterback went in the portal. Now, where are they going to go from there? Well, that's the interesting part. Here's what I got in front of you, Jon. UCLA's quarterback, they had a great year. This guy had a great year at UCLA. He's leaving. Washington State, unbelievable year. Cam Ward. You got K-State, Will Howard. You got Duke, Riley Leonard. It looks like he's going to probably go to Notre Dame, by the way. Oklahoma, they got Dylan Gabriel. You know where he's probably going? Oregon. That's the word on the street. But the weirdest one of them all for me, Jon, is this one. Ohio State's got the money, right? They can hold on to players. You know, you've got the NIL and all the rest of these kinds of things. Why is Kyle McCord, the quarterback who had a great year, by the way, did everything right? I mean, his completion percentage, his lack of interceptions, his great receivers, we all know that, got a great tight end, but he helped make him great because he was putting the ball on the money a lot. This kid was pretty damn good. So you just kind of wonder, like, in that case, Jon, I don't get it. And that's what I wanted to focus on was him. What, if you were to look in the crystal ball of Jon Najarian right now, why is this kid leaving? Why is he going into the portal? I don't get it, because it would be one thing if he was at the University of Minnesota, where we don't have the same kind of NIL money as Ohio State and Michigan and Alabama and Georgia, USC and all these schools. But he's at Ohio State. So why is he going in the portal?
Well, just because, as you know, Pete, Pete, it's a leading question, folks, because you go into the portal, it doesn't mean you have to leave. Now, it could be a leverage play, Pete. He could be leveraging Ohio State. Now, C.J. Campbell's a redshirt sophomore running back at Florida State. He came into the portal. They had 3 of their top players, Pete, go into the portal at Florida State. And with that one, like to your point, Pete, it's more understandable because they went 13-0 and get no respect. You know, they don't get into the big show, the big dance. Ohio State, if they would have beat Michigan, and they were still probably that far from being in there, just like Georgia was that far, but they lost late in the year. So that made a big difference. So Alabama's in and they're not. But this is, some of these players understand enough, Pete, that they can leverage the team that they're on to try to get that big money now. Because when they come out and sign that first NFL contract, some of them are going to be taking a pay cut.
That's why it's messed up, right? I mean, in my mind, that is the problem with this whole world of NIL. There's no restrictions. There's no anything. I mean, Jon, there is a cap for the NFL, right? There's a cap for a lot of different professional sports. Not all of them. Not everybody has a salary cap, but there are versions of it. Major League Baseball, it's over. And yet the NIL, they just go, you know what? Whatever the hell you can raise, you can spend it. If you raise $15 million, you want to give it to one guy, go right ahead. You're going to spread it out, go right ahead. By the way, that's kind of the problem at Colorado, Jon, is Deion's a great guy, but he split that money up between his kids. And by the time he was done, there was no money left for anybody else. And that's why he didn't have an offensive line. It's why he didn't have it. I mean, sometimes you got to be a little bit smarter about how you decide to allocate this kind of thing out if that's the case. But hey, why don't we roll to the next one, Jon? How about this? And I think this is kind of a fun thought. The Texans, we talked about them the other day, and I said how I think that C.J. Stroud, this guy, should he be potentially
the
MVP, right? Let's forget the MVP for a minute. How about the team, the Houston, Texans, and what they're doing? Now, last night you had an issue going on because Trevor Lawrence had a problem with his ankle. Not broken, but it's, certainly something that could be something that would nag him a lot. We'll see. Doesn't mean that it will. But I wrote this down, Jon. Houston's got left the New York Jets. Would you call that a win? Probably, right? I mean, the Jets stink. The Titans are 4-8, right? They're okay at best. They haven't figured out their quarterback situation, and they're kind of trying to figure it out with some of the draft picks and so forth. But, you go to Tennessee. That's most likely a win. You got a home with the Browns. Let's call that one a loss. You got another one against the Titans, but now you're at home. Probably a win. You finish up with the Colts. There's a possibility that Houston goes over Jacksonville. By the way, they beat the Jags in week 3, 37-17 in Jacksonville, John. So this is a team where on the defensive side, they hold people to about 20 points. They play pretty damn good defense. On the offensive side, they're number 6 in yards, but you know what? They're number 2 in passing yards. I think that says a little something about that MVP talk we were talking about. So in any case, I think this Houston team could be one of those that it's amazing, but they were a 3-win awful team. They had a terrible quarterback play. They didn't have the players they needed. And in a single year with free agency in the draft, look at where they are. I mean, these guys, their possibilities in front of them are to actually even win their division right now. They've got a winning record. So what do you think? What do you think of Houston? Do you think that it's not crazy because it's right there in front of us, but can they leapfrog Jacksonville and maybe even win the division?
Well, now that, like you say, Trevor Lawrence went down, Pete, yes, they could, because it'll be a real challenge for Jacksonville Jaguars now that Trevor's going to be on the sidelines. By the way, Brock Purdy, Pete, he's the odds-on favorite right now. But this far behind him, in his 8th year out of Mississippi State, freaking Dak Prescott, and he is breathing down Purdy's neck. Now, I'm happy for Dak because so many people were hating on him, Pete. And the kid, he seems to be a hard worker. Obviously, to be a quarterback in this league, the NFL, you got to have an ego. And he does, obviously. But I don't know a quarterback in the league that doesn't, Pete. Even ones that suck now, like Cam Newton, have huge egos still. But, Jalen Hurts is number 3. I've got Patrick Mahomes, number 4, Lamar Jackson, number 5, Tua, number 6. So there are plenty of great players here. I think that C.J. Stroud being in the running, he's probably top 8, but he ain't going to be the MVP. And they don't want Purdy to really be the MVP, Pete, but if he doesn't screw up, I don't know how he loses it because all he does is win. But the NFL, with all the combine and all of the computerized, okay, this guy, his wrist is this big and his arms are this long and so forth and so on. All of that, he was Mr. Irrelevant, the last guy taken in the draft. I know we all know that, but that's why they don't want him to win, because nobody had this guy in this position. Nobody had him there. And so it's embarrassing for the NFL, for the scouts, for everything. But it's also wonderful because, as you have always said, Pete, someday Pete will be an NFL GM, folks. And Pete always says there are airport players, in other words, players that look great walking through the airport. But what was their body of work in college? That's what matters. And it doesn't, all this other stuff. Oh, well, but this guy was 2/10 slower in the 40 than we thought. Freaking Brady was over 5 in the 40, Pete. And, a lot of us still think he's the GOAT.
Yeah, it is amazing. And these GMs, they stumble and bumble and they all get caught up. I mean, and sometimes it's ownership too, right? With Bryce Young. Was that really the right way to trade everybody to get that first pick? And that's who you take, really? No. It is amazing. I like Dak, John. I always have liked Dak. I thought coming out of college, he was disrespected where he was drafted and everything else. That being said, I would say, however, that when I'm looking at them, the one issue that I have with what he's done has been not his fault entirely, but against San Francisco, they fell apart, right? San Francisco's great. Against Philly, they lost. They beat a terrible Giants team. I'm just looking real quick. A terrible Carolina team.
Twice. They beat a terrible Giants team twice.
Yeah, and I'm just going in order. And then Carolina, they're pretty awful. 1 win. Washington, another awful team. But he did look good against Seattle, who I respect them, and Pete Carroll. So I think he certainly is in the running. I said this the other day to you, and I'm going to go right back to it, John. I think San Francisco's got three players who could win the MVP. I mean, it could be Deebo Samuel. That guy does everything. Could be McCaffrey, another guy who does everything. Or Purdy, a guy who spreads the ball around to everybody, including Kittle and whoever else. So to your point, I mean, I like Brock Purdy. I like everything that kid stands for, who he is. You know, he's too small. He's too slow. He's too everything. But he wins a lot of games, and he's had a perfect game here and there. That doesn't seem like a bad resume to me.
Yeah. And, does he have great weapons? Yes. Did San Francisco, did Lynch make the second, well, I guess the best trade in history, Pete? I was going to say second best, but to get McCaffrey from those idiots in Carolina for a bag of balls, I mean, oh my God, that was the dumbest thing. And all he's done is light it up, has played hurt at times, but he hasn't been hurt much because, to your point, he's one of the strongest running backs in football.
Yep.
And so, I think you're right. McCaffrey would be in the running, but let's be real. It's going to be a quarterback, and it's probably Purdy or Jalen Hurts or Dak.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Depending how it wins out. Mm-hmm.
Yep. It's a quarterback award. You're right. I mean, it's like the Heisman Trophy, right? I mean, I did see Ohio State. They were able to get the wide receiver Harrison there. He's going to be one of the folks sitting in the audience, but the odds that they actually give it to him, I don't think so. They go to these quarterbacks, John.
Yep, they do, Pete. Well, folks, thank you for tuning in. Pete and I appreciate it. Jared appreciates it because, he just bought a new house and he needs you to keep supporting the show. Because he loves gold.
I love gold.
Oh, boy, there it is.
But we appreciate you guys all tuning in. We will be back tomorrow at 1 p.m. Eastern Time with the Rebels Edge. Thank you for joining us.